Soul Garden.
Hello, my fellow Soul Gardeners. Welcome now to Astro 103. We're up to episode 8, and we are talking about planets in transit. So not the natal planets and where they're parked when you're born, but where they are today and how they affect your chart. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite planets, Venus. Venus is an awesome planet. We talk about it a lot. It's obviously one of the inner planets. It is the third planet. Well, Mercury, Venus, the second planet actually, if you consider Sun as the first one. That's where I came up with 3. And as you probably know, Venus is the creation vibration. Venus has a very quick orbit. It's close to the Sun. It's about 224 days to make one rotation, so it's less than a year. It will go around the zodiac wheel almost completely before the year's end. Okay, so it's on a second lap as we move through the rest of the year. And Venus obviously is our love and creativity. Now, where Venus is in your chart will show us astrologers really a couple of things. Venus tends to be, it kind of depends on how you look at things, but Venus and Mars will get close to the Sun and then they'll seem to be far away from the Sun, right? Depending on where the Sun happens to be, right? So there's times where you can interpret Venus as ahead of the Sun. There are times when you can interpret Venus behind the Sun, depending on where the Sun is. And to me, as an astrologer, that's really how I look at it, because I look at how the Sun is going to rotate in the chart. So if Venus and Mars are ahead in the signs, okay, at that particular time, Venus in particular is what we're talking about, then I always look at Venus as spiritually planting seeds, all right, because Venus is creativity. So Venus is planting seeds, new ideas, because it's ahead of our consciousness, right? So planting seeds. So for instance, if the Sun is in the first house, ego, and Venus is in the third, all right, well, this month, the Sun in the house of ego, which is a birthday period in a solar chart, or would be a very famous or star-like person in a natal chart, but we're talking about in transit, so we're going to go to solar in this case. Well, let's say Venus is in the third. Well, while the person is, working on their ego, adjusting their ego in their birthday period, and really discovering their new personality, if Venus is in the third, while they're discovering their new personality, Venus is planting new ideas, new ways of expressing themselves, new ways of communicating, basically, right? And it's always in concert, right? All the planets are in concert with one another. So you can't just really focus on one planet. You've got to look at how they're all harmonizing and how they're all coming together. So if Venus is ahead of the Sun, it's planting seeds. We can go up a notch. Let's say the Sun's in the second house. The client is working on soul capital, self-esteem, and abundance, the ability to draw in and make magic. And let's say Venus is in the fourth house. Well, what's happening is, as this person is developing self-esteem and making money and doing all that sort of thing, because the Sun is where our awareness is right now, Venus is up ahead planting seeds of security and self-nurturing. So by making money, you are simultaneously developing security and self-nurturing. All right? You can see how it goes. Now let's reverse all of this. Let's say that the perception is behind the Sun. And it's kind of difficult, as far as like where you draw this line. Sometimes I draw these lines with my own intuition, basically, where I'm like, I look at all the planets and I go, I think it's behind or I think it's ahead. Because when it's halfway across, when the Sun is opposing these planets, you could kind of go either way. And sometimes I do go either way. I think that we are in a transition at that point. But let's say Venus is behind the Sun, all right? So the Sun, let's put the Sun in the fourth house right now. Let's say the Sun's in your fourth house, so you're working on home, family, and foundation, all right? And you are working on self-nurturing skills because the Sun is transiting the fourth house. And let's say Venus is up in the first house. Well, in this case, I think Venus has a healing effect in the transit, all right? Because Venus is behind our awareness. Our awareness was, just a couple months ago, was in the house of ego. Now the Sun has moved to the fourth house, and Venus is in the first, leaving Venus behind in the first. Well, the Sun already tried to upgrade and face all the issues of the first house just 1, 2, 3 months ago, right? So now that Venus has hit this space, to me, it is healing, rebalancing, bringing harmony to it. And in those cases, I would interpret that in that particular birth year or in that particular year, that person must have gone through a hell of a first house transit because it took Venus to come back and bring some healing to this situation. So Venus is ultimately healing and planting seeds, restoring harmony. Now there's some obvious Venus transits that should be mentioned. If Venus is in the 8th house, you are interested in harmony in an intimate way. So bow chicka bow wow, okay? And you can advise your clients, might get pregnant. Definitely a good pregnancy potential with Venus in the 8th. Venus in the 7th, planting seeds really of long-term relationships. If the sun and Venus are in the 7th house, not just planting seeds, you are probably creating, okay? Because you've got your awareness and your creativity in the same sector. So you are creating long-term relationships. You're creating new relationships. So you have to look at where the planets are and how they're all working together. Venus in the 5th house, woo-wee, you're falling in love. Does that mean you'll actually end up in a relationship? No, because 7th house is the commitment. But you might fall in love. You might suddenly have someone that you're just gaga over. You might fall in love with yourself. You might plant the seeds of a new creative project with Venus in the 5th house, all right? Anything that your soul wants. It's heart's desire being stirred by creativity. But let's say Venus is in the 5th house and the sun's up in the 7th. Well, then I'd look at Venus as, oh, we're healing the 5th house. We're healing the inner child. We're healing and restoring balance and order. So if Venus is ahead, I think it's planting seeds. If Venus is behind, I think it's restoring balance and order and healing. Now, retrograde versus direct. There are times when Venus is direct. There are times when Venus is retrograde. Now, remember, retrograde is always the internalization of a particular planet, and direct is always the externalization, right? So when Venus is direct, you are planting seeds and you are seeing creativity come and rebalancing and harmonizing happen in your outer life. It is happening in your outer life. It is happening to you. You're seeing it very much in the world. This is a time to take a creative project forward, okay? So Venus direct in the 5th, take a creative project forward. Venus direct in the 10th, take a career, new career idea forward, all right? Venus retrograde. Venus retrograde is you burning the midnight oil, coming up with brilliant ideas, you being creative internally, you thinking of these great ideas, not necessarily expressing them, not necessarily talking about them, not necessarily trying to pitch them to other people, but instead internalizing that creativity, all right? Now, I think there's a difference between creation and creativity, and I talk about that, I think, in the first season of Astro 101, but there is this distinct difference. Venus tends to take something that has been created and run with it, rebalance it, beautify it, harmonize it, etc. But the actual birth is the sun, all right? So there's a distinction there I think is very important. Things will birth. For instance, when I talked about Venus in the 8th house, Venus moves in the 8th house, and you might be planting seeds to something that you want to be born, or it might be an idea that you're carrying a little bit farther, but usually it's once the sun reaches that place that you actually see the birth. So you might have a lot of, for instance, Venus in the 5th is, oh, I've got all these ideas. You start talking to people about a creative project. You really want to do it. Oh my gosh, this could be exciting. You know, the idea is birth, though, maybe with the sun in the 3rd. By the time the sun hits the 5th house, we try to activate it. So I think we're most creative when Venus is retrograde. And we also heal ourselves the most and rebalance our own lives when Venus is retrograde. I think when Venus is direct, we actually see results. I think Venus is creativity, taking an idea and running with it, and I think the sun is creation. All right, I hope that makes a good enough distinguishing party between the two, and I will see you next time with Astro 103. Live, love, be.